As soon as my daughter received $86 million in the lottery, she packed to travel. I saw my son-in-law hide something in her suitcase. When he was distracted, I opened the suitcase and froze at what I found. I put that thing in his car without saying anything. 20 minutes later, the FBI knocked on the door. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this and comment the city you're watching from. My name is Oliver, and at 61 years old, I thought I had seen everything life could throw at me. I was wrong. It started on a Tuesday morning in March when my daughter Kaia called me, her voice shaking with excitement. She had won $86 million in the state lottery. $86 million. I had to sit down when she told me, my coffee growing cold in my hands as the magnitude of it hit me. "Dad, can you believe it?" she kept saying over and over. "We're rich, Dad. We're actually rich." I should have been purely happy for her. Kaia had worked 2 jobs for years, struggling to make ends meet, while Paul, her husband of 3 years, seemed to drift from one failed business venture to another. She deserved this stroke of luck more than anyone I knew. But something in Paul's reaction when I arrived at their house that afternoon set off alarm bells in my head. While Kaia was practically bouncing off the walls with excitement, showing me the winning ticket for the 100th time, Paul stood in the corner with his arms crossed, watching, not celebrating, not joining in her joy, just watching with this calculating look in his eyes that made my skin crawl. "This changes everything," he said quietly, when Kaia went to the kitchen to make more coffee. The way he said it, the cold certainty in his voice, didn't sound like a man celebrating his wife's good fortune. It sounded like a man making plans. Over the next few days, as Kaia worked with lottery officials and financial advisors, I noticed Paul's behavior becoming increasingly strange. He would disappear for hours at a time, claiming he was handling business matters related to the winnings. When I asked Kaia about it, she just shrugged. "He's being so supportive, Dad. He's taking care of all the complicated stuff so I don't have to worry about it." But I was worried. Paul had never shown much interest in handling complicated matters before. He was the type of man who let Kaia deal with the bills, the insurance, even their tax returns. Suddenly, he was Mr. Responsible? It didn't add up. The real red flag came when they announced their plans for a celebration trip to Europe. Kaia was over the moon about visiting Paris and Rome, places she had only dreamed of seeing. Paul was enthusiastic too, but in a way that felt forced, like he was acting a part. "We need to celebrate properly," he kept saying. "This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." I watched him during these conversations, noting how his eyes would dart away when Kaia talked about their itinerary, how he would change the subject when she mentioned specific hotels or restaurants she wanted to try. It was as if he had his own agenda that had nothing to do with celebrating. The Thursday before their Friday departure, I stopped by their house to drop off some travel guides I had picked up. Kaia was at the bank, Paul said, finalizing some paperwork. The house felt different with just him there, tense, like the air before a storm. I found him in their bedroom, standing over 2 large suitcases, spread open on the bed. He was holding something in his hand, something small and rectangular, wrapped in what looked like plastic. When he saw me in the doorway, he jumped like I had caught him stealing. "Oliver," he said, quickly shoving whatever it was deep into the side pocket of Kaia's suitcase. "I didn't hear you come in." "Just dropping off some travel guides," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "What was that you were packing?" "What?" "Oh, nothing. Just some of Kaia's medications. You know how she gets motion sickness." But Kaia didn't get motion sickness. In all her 32 years, I had never seen her get carsick, seasick, or airsick. She had the strongest stomach of anyone in our family. Paul zipped up the suitcase quickly and moved it to the floor, positioning himself between me and the luggage like he was guarding it. We made small talk for a few minutes about their travel plans, but I could see the sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool March air. After I left, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. That night, I lay awake thinking about Paul's behavior, about the way he had been acting since Kaia won the lottery, about that wrapped package he had hidden so quickly in her suitcase. By morning, I had made a decision. I was going back to their house. I waited until I saw Paul's car pull out of the driveway, heading toward what I assumed was another one of his mysterious errands. Kaia's car was gone too. She had mentioned something about meeting with an insurance agent. The house was empty. I used the spare key they kept under the garden gnome, telling myself I was just being a concerned father. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe Paul really was just being supportive and helpful. But as I climbed the stairs to their bedroom, every instinct I had was screaming that something was terribly wrong. The suitcases were still there, packed and ready for their morning flight. I stared at Kaia's suitcase for a long moment, my heart pounding. Was I really going to go through my daughter's luggage based on nothing more than a bad feeling about her husband? Then I remembered the look in Paul's eyes when he said, "This changes everything," the calculating coldness that had nothing to do with celebration or joy. I unzipped the suitcase. My hands were shaking as I reached into the side pocket where I had seen Paul hide that wrapped package. The fabric felt rough under my fingers as I searched, and for a moment I thought maybe I had imagined the whole thing. Maybe my suspicion of Paul had made me see things that weren't there. Then my fingers touched plastic. I pulled out the package Paul had hidden, and my blood ran cold. It wasn't medication. It was a small brick of white powder, professionally wrapped and sealed. Next to it were several documents, passports, but not the ones Kaia had shown me excitedly just days before. These had her photo, but different names, different birth dates. My legs gave out, and I sat heavily on the edge of the bed, staring at what I held in my hands. This wasn't just suspicious behavior. This was something that could destroy my daughter's life forever. I kept digging through the suitcase with growing horror. Hidden beneath her folded clothes were more packages, small but unmistakably identical to the first. In a hidden compartment, I found documents that looked official but felt wrong. Customs forms, travel itineraries to countries that weren't on Kaia's excited list of destinations, and business cards with names I didn't recognize. The worst part was how carefully it had all been arranged. Someone had taken time to plan this, to use my daughter as an unwitting accomplice in whatever this was. And that someone was the man she trusted most in the world. I sat there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, trying to process what I was looking at. Paul wasn't just being supportive about Kaia's lottery win. He was using it. Her sudden wealth, her excitement about traveling, her trust in him to handle the details. It was all part of some elaborate plan that she knew nothing about. The sound of a car door slamming outside snapped me back to reality. I quickly but carefully removed everything that didn't belong in an innocent traveler's suitcase. The packages, the false documents, the suspicious paperwork. I stuffed it all into a plastic shopping bag I found in their closet. By the time I heard footsteps on the front porch, I had zipped up Kaia's suitcase and was sitting in the living room, pretending to read one of their magazines. "Dad?" Kaia called out as she came through the door. "What are you doing here?" "Thought I'd stop by and wish you both a safe trip," I said, hoping my voice sounded normal. "Big day tomorrow." She beamed at me, her face glowing with excitement. "I can barely sleep. I'm so excited. Paul says we might extend the trip if we're having a good time. Isn't that wonderful?" I nodded and smiled, but inside I was screaming. She had no idea what Paul had planned for their extended trip. She had no idea that her trust, her lottery winnings, and her very freedom were being used as tools in someone else's scheme. After she went upstairs to finish packing, I made my excuse to leave. But instead of going home, I drove to Paul's office building and waited. Sure enough, 20 minutes later, his car pulled into the parking lot. I watched him from across the street as he got out and walked toward the building. He looked relaxed, confident, like a man whose plans were falling perfectly into place. The plastic bag containing everything I had found sat on the passenger seat of my car like a ticking bomb. I had a choice to make. I could confront Paul directly, but that would tip him off and give him time to create new plans or manipulate Kaia into not believing me. I could tell Kaia what I had found, but would she believe that her loving husband was capable of something this devastating? She was already defensive about him, always making excuses for his failures and shortcomings. Or I could do something else entirely. I waited until Paul disappeared into the building, then walked over to his car. It was unlocked. Paul had always been careless about details like that. I opened his trunk and carefully placed the plastic bag inside, tucking it behind his spare tire where it wouldn't be immediately visible but would certainly be found if anyone searched his vehicle. As I drove home, my hands were still shaking. I had just made a decision that would change everything, and I wasn't even sure it was the right one. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I couldn't let Paul use my daughter as a pawn in whatever dangerous game he was playing. That evening, Kaia called to thank me again for the travel guides and to tell me how much she loved me. Her voice was so full of happiness and anticipation that I almost broke down and told her everything right then. But I didn't. Some instinct told me to wait, to let events unfold the way they needed to. "Have a wonderful trip, sweetheart," I told her. "Just remember that no matter what happens, no matter where you go or what you see, you can always come home." "Of course, Dad." "Why would you say that?" "No reason," I said. "I just want you to know." After we hung up, I poured myself a drink and sat in my kitchen, staring at the phone. I had removed what looked like evidence of serious crimes from my daughter's suitcase and planted it in her husband's car. If I was wrong about Paul's intentions, I had just committed a terrible violation of trust that could destroy our family. But if I was right, I had just saved my daughter from a nightmare she couldn't even imagine. The only thing left to do was wait and see which version of the truth would emerge. I had a feeling I wouldn't have to wait very long. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those packages, those false documents, the cold calculation in Paul's eyes. By 6 in the morning, I was sitting at my kitchen table with my third cup of coffee, staring at my phone and wondering if I should call Kaia before their flight. Their plane was scheduled to leave at 10:30. I kept checking the clock, imagining them getting ready. Paul probably acting excited and supportive while secretly planning whatever nightmare he had orchestrated. The thought of my daughter walking into an airport with no idea of the danger she was in made my chest tight. At 7:45, my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, and for a moment I wondered if it was Kaia, maybe having second thoughts about the trip or wanting to say goodbye one more time. But when I opened the door, 2 people in dark suits stood on my porch, badges already out. "Mr. Oliver Harrison?" the woman asked. She was probably in her 30s, with sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "Yes, that's me." "I'm Agent Martinez. This is Agent Chen. We're with the FBI. We need to ask you some questions about your son-in-law, Paul Hendricks." My heart stopped. This was it. Whatever Paul was involved in, it was big enough to bring federal agents to my door. I invited them in, my mind racing through all the possible scenarios. "Mr. Harrison," Agent Martinez said as we sat in my living room, "we've been investigating Paul Hendricks in connection with an international drug trafficking operation. We have reason to believe he's planning to transport illegal substances out of the country today." I tried to look surprised, but Agent Chen was watching me carefully. "You don't seem shocked by this information, sir." I took a deep breath. There was no point in pretending anymore. "I found something yesterday in my daughter's suitcase." Both agents leaned forward. "What kind of something?" Agent Martinez asked. I told them everything. About Paul's strange behavior since Kaia won the lottery, about catching him hiding something in her luggage, about what I found when I searched the suitcase. I told them about the packages, the false documents, and how I had moved everything to Paul's car. "You removed evidence from your daughter's luggage and placed it in the suspect's vehicle?" Agent Chen asked, making notes. "I couldn't let him use her as a drug mule," I said. "She has no idea what he's planning. She thinks they're going on a celebration trip to Europe." Agent Martinez and Agent Chen exchanged glances. "Mr. Harrison," Agent Martinez said, "your daughter is in more danger than you realize. Paul Hendricks isn't just a small-time drug trafficker. He's part of an international network that specializes in using innocent people as unwitting couriers. They target people who've recently come into money, lottery winners, inheritance recipients, people whose sudden wealth won't raise suspicions at customs." My blood turned to ice. "What do you mean? Unwitting couriers?" "They plant drugs and other contraband in their victim's luggage, usually with the help of someone the victim trusts completely. Once the victim is arrested in a foreign country, the organization uses their legal troubles as leverage. They either abandon the victim to face international drug charges alone, or they demand huge sums of money for legal help that never comes. I felt sick. And if the victim can't pay? Agent Chen's expression was grim. International drug charges carry severe penalties. We're talking decades in foreign prison, sometimes life sentences. The victims become completely dependent on their handlers, who drain their assets while promising help that never materializes. But I moved everything to Paul's car, I said desperately. Kaia doesn't have anything illegal in her luggage now. That's what probably saved her life, Agent Martinez said. We've been tracking this network for 2 years. Paul's been recruiting targets for months, but your daughter was going to be his biggest score. $86 million would have kept their operation funded for years. The room felt like it was spinning. My daughter had been walking into a trap that would have destroyed her life completely, and she didn't even know it. If I hadn't followed my instincts, if I hadn't searched that suitcase. We need to move quickly, Agent Chen said, standing up. Paul's associates are expecting him to board that plane with your daughter and the contraband. When he shows up without either, they'll know something's wrong. What about Kaia? I asked. She's probably at the airport right now, wondering where Paul is. We're coordinating with airport security, Agent Martinez said. She'll be intercepted before she can board any international flights for her own safety. As the agents prepared to leave, Agent Martinez turned back to me. Mr. Harrison, you should know that your actions yesterday likely prevented an international incident. If your daughter had been arrested abroad with those substances, the U.S. government would have had very limited ability to help her. After they left, I sat alone in my living room, trying to process everything I had learned. Paul wasn't just a failed businessman with questionable morals. He was a predator who had specifically targeted my daughter because of her lottery winnings. He had planned to use her trust, her excitement about traveling, and her newfound wealth to destroy her life completely. The worst part was how perfectly he had played his role. The supportive husband taking care of all the complicated details so Kaia wouldn't have to worry. She had been so grateful for his help, so touched by his apparent thoughtfulness. She had no idea that every kindness was calculated, every gesture of support was designed to make her more vulnerable. My phone rang, jolting me out of my thoughts. It was Kaia. Dad, her voice was shaky and confused. Something's wrong. Paul never came home last night, and now there are FBI agents at the airport saying I can't travel. They won't tell me what's happening, but they keep asking about Paul. What's going on? I closed my eyes, knowing that the conversation I was about to have would shatter her world. But it was better than the alternative. It was better than the phone call I might have received weeks or months from now, from a foreign prison where my daughter was facing drug trafficking charges. She couldn't understand. Kaia, I said softly, I need you to come home, right now. There are things about Paul that you don't know, things that put you in terrible danger. What are you talking about? Dad, you're scaring me. I know, sweetheart, I'm scared too. But you're safe now, and I'm going to explain everything. Just come home. As I waited for her to arrive, I looked out my window at the quiet suburban street where I had lived for the past 15 years. Everything looked normal, peaceful, unchanged, but I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. In the space of 24 hours, my daughter's life had been saved and destroyed at the same time. The man she loved and trusted had been planning to sacrifice her freedom, her future, and possibly her life for money. And somehow, through luck or instinct or divine intervention, I had been in the right place at the right time to stop it. Now came the hardest part, helping her understand what had almost happened to her and watching her heart break as she realized that the person she trusted most in the world had been willing to destroy her completely. Kaia arrived at my house 45 minutes later, and I could see she had been crying. Her face was blotchy and her hands were shaking as she fumbled with her keys before giving up and just ringing the doorbell. Dad, what's happening? She said. The moment I opened the door, the FBI agents wouldn't tell me anything except that I can't leave the country and that Paul is wanted for questioning. This has to be some kind of mistake. I led her to the living room, the same place where I had sat with the federal agents just hours earlier. She perched on the edge of the couch like she was ready to run, her eyes wide and frightened. Kaia, I said carefully. I need you to listen to me. Really listen. And I need you to try to stay calm while I tell you some things about Paul that are going to be very hard to hear. No, she said immediately, shaking her head. Whatever you think Paul did, you're wrong. He loves me. He's been nothing but supportive since I won the lottery. He's been taking care of everything so I don't have to stress about the money. That phrase, taking care of everything, made my chest tighten. She had no idea how sinister those words really were. Sweetheart, yesterday I went to your house while you were at the bank. I saw Paul hiding something in your suitcase, something that wasn't medication or travel supplies. Her face flushed red. You went through my luggage? Dad, how could you violate my privacy like that? Because I was worried about you. And it turns out I was right to be worried. I told her everything about the packages I had found, the false documents, the fake passports with her picture, but different names. I watched her face change as I spoke. Denial giving way to confusion. Confusion to horror. That's impossible, she whispered. Paul wouldn't. He loves me. We're married. Why would he want to hurt me? Because you won $86 million, I said gently. The FBI told me that Paul is part of a network that targets lottery winners and people who suddenly come into large amounts of money. They use them as unwitting drug mules, and when the victims get arrested in foreign countries, they drain their assets while pretending to help with legal fees. Kaia was staring at me like I was speaking a foreign language. Drug mules? Dad, this is crazy. Paul doesn't even smoke cigarettes. He's never been involved with drugs. Kaia, the FBI has been investigating him for 2 years. This isn't about personal drug use. This is about a business, a criminal enterprise that specifically targets people like you. He stood up abruptly, pacing to the window and back. Even if any of this is true, which I don't believe it is, why didn't Paul just ask me for money? I would have given him anything he needed. I love him. The innocence in that statement broke my heart. She still didn't understand the scale of what had been planned for her. It's not about getting money from you, sweetheart. It's about using you to generate money for years. If you had been arrested in Europe with those drugs, you would have faced decades in prison. Paul and his associates would have positioned themselves as your only hope for legal help, and they would have bled your lottery winnings dry while you rotted in a foreign jail. Stop, she said, covering her ears. Just stop. I don't want to hear any more of this. But I couldn't stop. She needed to understand the full scope of what had almost happened to her. The FBI agent told me that victims in this situation either die in foreign prisons or become completely dependent on their handlers. Paul wasn't planning a celebration trip with you, Kaia. He was planning to destroy your life and profit from it for years. She whirled around to face me, tears streaming down her cheeks. You're lying. You never liked Paul. And now you're making up these horrible stories to break us up. You're jealous that I'm happy, that I have money now. Her words stung, but I understood them. She was in shock, trying to process something that was fundamentally incomprehensible. The man she loved and trusted had been planning to sacrifice her freedom and possibly her life for money. Kaia, I moved everything I found from your suitcase to Paul's car. That's why the FBI was able to arrest him. They found the evidence in his vehicle. You framed him, she said, her voice rising. You planted evidence in his car to make him look guilty. I didn't plant anything. I moved contraband that he had hidden in your luggage without your knowledge. I saved you from carrying drugs across international borders. But she wasn't listening anymore. She was spiraling into denial and anger, and I was the target of both. I want to see Paul, she said. I want to hear his side of this story. There has to be an explanation. The FBI has him in custody, sweetheart. Even if you could see him, do you really think he would tell you the truth now? He's always told me the truth, she said, but her voice wavered slightly. I could see doubt beginning to creep in, small cracks in her absolute faith in Paul. I hated being the one to cause her this pain, but it was better than the alternative. Has he? I asked quietly. Has Paul always been honest with you about his business dealings, his finances, where he goes during those long disappearances? She opened her mouth to answer, then closed it. I could see her mind working, remembering inconsistencies she had ignored or explained away. You don't understand him like I do, she said finally, but the conviction was gone from her voice. Maybe not. But I understand that someone who loves you doesn't put drugs in your suitcase without telling you. Someone who loves you doesn't get you fake passports under different names. Someone who loves you doesn't plan to let you get arrested in a foreign country while they profit from your suffering. She sank back down onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. This can't be happening. This can't be real. I know it's hard to accept. I know you love him. But Kaia, you need to face the truth about what kind of man Paul really is. When she looked up at me, her eyes were different. The blind trust was still there, but it was cracked now, letting in the first rays of doubt. If what you're saying is true, she said slowly, then my entire marriage has been a lie. Everything Paul ever said to me, every moment of happiness we shared, it was all fake. I wanted to tell her that wasn't necessarily true, that maybe Paul had genuinely cared for her, even while planning to use her. But I couldn't. The FBI had been clear about how these operations worked. Paul had targeted her specifically because of her financial situation, and everything since then had been calculated to make her more vulnerable. I'm sorry, sweetheart, I said. I'm so sorry this is happening to you. She sat in silence for a long time, and I could almost see her mind working through their entire relationship, re-examining every moment through this new, horrible lens. Finally, she looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. What happens now? What am I supposed to do? Now you heal, I said. Now you accept that you escaped something terrible and you start rebuilding your life. But even as I said it, I knew it wouldn't be that simple. The woman sitting in front of me wasn't just dealing with the end of her marriage. She was dealing with the complete destruction of her reality. The revelation that the person she trusted most in the world had been willing to sacrifice her for money. The road ahead was going to be long and painful, but at least she was going to walk it as a free woman instead of from inside a foreign prison cell. The next 2 weeks were the hardest of my life, and I wasn't even the one whose world had been shattered. Kaia stayed with me during that time, unable to face going back to the house she had shared with Paul. She barely ate, barely slept, and spent most of her time staring out the window like she was waiting for someone to tell her this had all been a terrible nightmare. Agent Martinez called me regularly with updates on the investigation. Each revelation was worse than the last. We've been going through Paul's communications, she told me during one of our conversations. Mr. Harrison, I think you need to prepare your daughter for some difficult information. More difficult than learning her husband planned to frame her for international drug trafficking? Yes, sir. Much more difficult. That evening, Agent Martinez came to the house to speak with both of us. Kaia had finally started asking questions about the investigation, which I took as a positive sign. At least she was beginning to accept the reality of the situation. Ms. Hendricks, Agent Martinez said, settling into the chair across from us, we've discovered that your husband's involvement in this criminal network goes back much further than we initially realized. How much further? Kaia asked. Her voice was flat, emotionless. She had been like that since our conversation 2 weeks ago, like someone had drained all the feeling out of her. We have evidence that Paul began planning to target you approximately 18 months ago, long before you won the lottery. I felt the air leave the room. 18 months ago, Kaia and Paul had been newlyweds, still in what she called their honeymoon phase. That's impossible, Kaia said. 18 months ago, I was working 2 jobs and could barely afford groceries. I had nothing worth targeting. Agent Martinez pulled out a tablet and showed us a series of documents. Paul was monitoring lottery statistics and gambling patterns in this area. He specifically researched individuals who played the lottery regularly and had the demographic profile that his network preferred. Single women, limited family connections, steady employment history. Limited family connections, I asked. Single-parent households, no siblings, elderly parents, people who wouldn't have large support systems if something went wrong. Agent Martinez looked at Kaia with sympathy. Your father was your only close family member. If you had been arrested abroad, Paul's network would have been your primary source of support and information. Kaia was staring at the documents like they were written in a foreign language. You're saying he married me because he thought I might win the lottery someday? Not exactly. The lottery win was unexpected good fortune for his operation. But we believe he married you because you fit the profile of someone who could be easily manipulated and isolated if needed. The criminal network he works with has used this strategy before." "Used it how?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Agent Martinez hesitated. "They've married 3 other women in the past 5 years. 2 are currently serving lengthy prison sentences in Thailand and Colombia. The 3rd died in a Mexican jail while awaiting trial." The tablet slipped from Kaia's hands and clattered to the floor. She was staring at Agent Martinez with horror. "Other women? He's done this before?" "Paul Hendricks isn't even his real name," Agent Martinez said gently. "His name is Marcus Webb, and he has a history of targeting vulnerable women for various criminal enterprises. Marriage is just one of his methods." I watched my daughter's face crumble as the last pieces of her faith in Paul, in Marcus, finally shattered completely. The man she had loved, the man she had trusted with her life, didn't even exist. He was a character, a role played by a predator who specialized in destroying women like her. "The house we lived in," Kaia whispered. "Our wedding, our honeymoon, everything we built together. Was any of it real?" "The marriage was legal," Agent Martinez said, "but it was entered into under false pretenses with fraudulent identification. You'll be able to have it annulled without any difficulty." "That's not what I meant," Kaia said, tears finally starting to flow again. "I meant, was there ever a moment when he actually cared about me? Was there ever a time when he wasn't planning to destroy my life?" Agent Martinez looked uncomfortable. "Based on the evidence we've found, I don't believe so. Every major decision in your relationship appears to have been calculated to increase your dependence on him and isolate you from other support systems." I thought about all the times Paul had discouraged Kaia from spending time with her friends, how he had convinced her to quit her second job because it was too stressful, how he had subtly undermined her confidence in her own decision-making abilities. I had attributed it to normal relationship dynamics, maybe a bit of possessiveness, but it had all been part of a plan. "There's more," Agent Martinez said. "We found evidence that Paul was drugging your food periodically with mild sedatives." "Wait, what?" I jumped up from my chair. "He was poisoning her?" "Not poisoning exactly, but he was putting small amounts of anxiety medication in her meals to make her more compliant and emotionally dependent. It's a common tactic used by manipulative partners." Kaia was shaking now, her whole body trembling as the full scope of Paul's manipulation became clear. "I thought I was going crazy sometimes. I would feel foggy and confused, especially after dinner. He would tell me I was just stressed from work. The medication would have made you more susceptible to suggestion and less likely to question his decisions," Agent Martinez explained. "It also would have made you more emotionally volatile, which he could then use to convince you that you needed his stability and support." I felt a rage building in my chest that was unlike anything I had ever experienced. This man, this monster, had systematically poisoned and manipulated my daughter for over a year. He had violated her body, her mind, and her trust in ways that went far beyond simple criminal behavior. "Where is he now?" I asked through gritted teeth. "Federal custody. He'll be facing charges for drug trafficking, fraud, identity theft, and several other federal crimes. With his history and the evidence we have, he's looking at life in prison without the possibility of parole." "Good," I said. "I hope he rots." Kaia was quiet for a long time after Agent Martinez left. She sat curled up in the corner of my couch, staring at nothing. Finally, she spoke. "Dad, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Of course. Did you ever suspect, before the lottery win, before you found those things in my suitcase, did you ever think something was wrong with Paul?" I considered lying to spare her feelings, but she deserved the truth. "Yes. I never liked him, but I thought it was just normal protective father instincts. Looking back, there were signs. The way he isolated you from your friends, how he always had to control every decision, the way he made you doubt yourself. But I convinced myself it was just his personality." She nodded slowly. "I should have seen it too. All those times I felt confused or anxious. All those moments when something felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on what it was. He was literally drugging me to make me compliant. This isn't your fault, Kaia. None of this is your fault. Isn't it, though? I married him. I trusted him. I let him into every aspect of my life. He's a professional manipulator with years of experience destroying women exactly like you. You're not the first person he fooled, and if we hadn't caught him, you wouldn't have been the last. She was quiet again for a while. When she finally looked at me, something had changed in her eyes. The devastation was still there, but underneath it was something harder, more determined. I want to know about the other women, she said. The ones who are in prison, the one who died. I want to know their names and their stories. Kaia, I don't think that's a good idea. It will just cause you more pain. Maybe, but they're the only people in the world who really understand what I've been through. And if they're still alive, still in prison because of him, maybe there's something I can do to help them. I looked at my daughter and realized that, despite everything Paul had done to her, despite all his attempts to break her down and make her dependent, he had failed in the most important way. She was still fundamentally herself, still the compassionate, determined woman who wanted to help others even when she was struggling with her own pain. Paul had tried to destroy her, but instead he had given her a purpose that was bigger than herself. He had created his own worst nightmare, a victim who refused to stay silent. 6 months later, I was standing in the kitchen making coffee when Kaia walked in with a smile on her face. It was the first genuine smile I had seen from her since this whole nightmare began, and it made my heart lighter than it had been in months. The lawyers called, she said, settling into her usual chair at my kitchen table. The annulment is final. Officially, I was never married to Marcus Webb. I poured her a cup of coffee and sat down across from her. She looked different now, stronger, more confident. The hollow look in her eyes had gradually faded over the past few months, replaced by something I could only describe as determination. "How does it feel?" I asked. "Liberating," she said without hesitation. "Like I finally got my life back." She had been living with me since the day Agent Martinez revealed the full scope of Marcus's crimes, and I had watched her transform from a broken, confused woman into someone with a clear sense of purpose. It hadn't been easy. There had been days when she couldn't get out of bed, nights when she woke up screaming from nightmares about foreign prisons and betrayal. But slowly, gradually, she had found her way back to herself. "Agent Martinez called yesterday," Kaia said, taking a sip of her coffee. "Marcus was sentenced to life without parole. All of his criminal associates are being extradited to face charges in the countries where they committed crimes." "Good," I said. "What about the other women?" Kaia's expression grew serious. "That's the best news. Carmen and Sophia, the 2 women who are in prison in Thailand and Colombia, their cases are being reviewed. The evidence from Marcus's trial proves they were victims, not willing participants. Their lawyers think they'll be released within the next few months." Over the past 6 months, Kaia had become obsessed with learning about Marcus's other victims. She had contacted lawyers, human rights organizations, and government officials in multiple countries, using her lottery winnings to fund legal assistance for the women whose lives had been destroyed by the same man who had tried to destroy hers. "I got a letter from Carmen yesterday," Kaia continued, pulling an envelope from her purse. "She wanted to thank me for hiring the legal team that's working on her case. Dad, she's been in that prison for 3 years. 3 years of her life stolen because she trusted the wrong person. And now she has hope of getting out because of what you're doing." Kaia nodded. "The lawyers think her case is the strongest. She could be home by Christmas." I reached across the table and squeezed my daughter's hand. "I'm proud of you, sweetheart. What you're doing for these women, it takes real courage." "I have to do it," she said simply. "If you hadn't found those drugs in my suitcase, if you hadn't trusted your instincts and moved them to Marcus's car, I would be in prison right now too. I would be just another one of his victims, forgotten and abandoned in a foreign jail. I owe it to them to use the freedom you gave me to help them get theirs back." The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Marcus had targeted Kaia because of her lottery winnings, planning to use her money to fund his criminal operations for years. Instead, she was using that same money to destroy everything he had built and free the women he had trapped. "There's something else," Kaia said, her voice taking on an excited tone. I've been working with a group of international lawyers and human rights advocates. We're developing a program to identify and assist other victims of similar schemes. The FBI estimates there could be dozens of women around the world who have been targeted by networks like Marcus's. She pulled out her phone and showed me a website she had been developing. It's called the Haven Project. We provide legal assistance, financial support, and counseling services to women who have been manipulated into carrying drugs across international borders. We also work with governments to change laws that treat these women as criminals instead of victims. I scrolled through the website, reading testimonials from women who had been helped by Kaia's organization. Their stories were heartbreaking, but also inspiring. Tales of survival, resilience, and hope in the face of unimaginable betrayal. How many people are you helping now? I asked. 17 active cases across 8 countries, she said proudly, and we're getting new referrals every week. Turns out Marcus's network was just one of many. This is a much bigger problem than anyone realized. I looked at my daughter, amazed by the woman she had become. 6 months ago, she had been a victim, broken and confused by the revelation that her entire life had been built on lies. Now she was a force for change, using her own pain to heal others and prevent future victims. The best part, Kaia continued, is that every woman we help makes Marcus's network weaker. Every case we win, every victim we free, it dismantles a piece of what he tried to build. He thought he was so smart, targeting women like me because we seemed vulnerable and isolated, but he underestimated something. What's that? He underestimated the power of women who refused to stay silent. That evening, Kaia moved back to her own place, not the house she had shared with Marcus, which she had sold months ago, but a new apartment across town. It was smaller than the house, but brighter, filled with plants and books and artwork from some of the women her organization had helped. As I helped her carry the last of her boxes upstairs, I realized how much had changed for both of us. 6 months ago, I had been a retired man living a quiet life, occasionally worrying about my daughter, but generally content with my peaceful routine. Now I was actively involved in her organization, using my business background to help manage operations and coordinate with law enforcement agencies around the world. "Dad," Kaia said as we finished setting up her living room, "I need to tell you something." "Oui, spouse." "What's that?" "If you hadn't trusted your instincts that day, if you hadn't been brave enough to search my suitcase and move those drugs, I would be dead or in prison right now. But it's more than that. You didn't just save my life, you gave me a purpose. Every woman we help, every victim we free, it all started with your courage to act when something felt wrong." I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. I was just being a father. I was protecting my daughter. No, you were being a hero, and because of what you did, 17 other women are free or on their way to freedom. Dozens more will be helped in the future. You didn't just save me, Dad. You saved all of them too. As I drove home that night, I thought about the chain of events that had brought us to this point. If I hadn't felt suspicious about Marcus's behavior, if I hadn't followed my instincts and searched that suitcase, if I hadn't been brave enough to move those drugs despite not knowing exactly what the consequences would be, everything would have been different. Kaia would be in a foreign prison, probably for the rest of her life. Marcus would still be operating his network, targeting other vulnerable women. Carmen and Sophia would still be abandoned in their cells with no hope of freedom. The Haven Project wouldn't exist, and dozens of future victims would have no one to turn to for help. Sometimes the smallest actions create the biggest changes. Sometimes trusting your instincts, even when you can't fully explain them, makes all the difference in the world. A year later, I attended the first annual Haven Project Gala. Kaia had organized it as a fundraiser and awareness event, bringing together survivors, lawyers, government officials, and supporters from around the world. Carmen was there, finally free from the Thai prison, where she had spent 3 agonizing years. Sophia had been released from Colombia and was working with Kaia to develop new victim identification protocols. As I watched my daughter speak to the crowd about the importance of believing survivors and supporting victims of international trafficking schemes, I felt a deep sense of pride and peace. She had taken the worst experience of her life and transformed it into a force for good that was changing lives around the world. Marcus had tried to destroy her, but instead, he had created his own nemesis. Every woman the Haven Project helped was proof that his plan had backfired spectacularly. He was spending the rest of his life in prison while his intended victim was dismantling everything he had worked to build. Sometimes the best revenge isn't anger or hatred. Sometimes it's healing, growth, and using your pain to prevent others from experiencing the same suffering. Kaia had found her power not in getting back at Marcus, but in making sure no other woman would fall into his trap. As she finished her speech and the crowd erupted in applause, Kaia caught my eye across the room and smiled. In that smile, I saw everything she had overcome and everything she had become. She was no longer the broken woman who had sat in my living room 6 months ago, shattered by betrayal and manipulation. She was a survivor, a leader, and a force for change in the world. And I had the privilege of being her father.